Hello everyone, this is Charlie from the Bloomingdale Public Library, and today we're going to be talking about a little application called WinDirStat. So what is WinDirStat? It's a free, open source utility that shows how storage space is used on a Windows computer. So basically, when you start to see error messages or that your storage is in the red, what you would do is run WinDirStat, so then you can see what is taking up space and use it to figure out what to delete and what to move to another hard drive. The latest version works on any Windows computer running Windows 7 or later. This would probably be a good time to remind you that Windows 10 officially loses support mid-October 2025. WinDirStat is short for Windows Directory Statistics, and the application was originally authored by Bernhard Seifert in 2003, and he was inspired by a similar application called KDirStat for Linux. Incidentally, the KDirStat project has been retired, so if you're looking for the equivalent, what you're looking for is QDirStat. There are many other similar applications with nearly the same functionality as WinDirStat, and you can find a bunch of them on the Windows Store. So if you go to the Windows Store, do a search for WinDirStat, you're not going to find it, but you will find many very, very similar applications, and I think the big one is called TreeMap. Okay, so how do we go about installing WinDirStat? The first thing we're going to do is open up a browser, and we're going to go to WinDirStat.net. And that should take you here. On the screen, we're going to click on Downloads. And on this screen, unless you know you need something else, you're going to want to choose the first link here. It's going to download the installer. I'm going to go ahead and run the installer. On this window, hit OK. Hit Next. I already have it installed, but from here, you would go ahead and agree to the folder you want to install to, and there's a checkbox for adding the shortcut to the desktop as well. So very straightforward. Alternatively, if you wanted to just get the standalone executable, you can go ahead and download the zip. And what you do with the zip file is just extract it, go to the folder that you want. You're probably looking at the x64 folder for most people, and this is the executable file. You can go ahead and put this wherever you like, maybe even stick it on a flash drive, run it, and it goes just like it would as if you had installed it normally. Alright, now that we have WinDirStat installed, what do? Well, you can double click the desktop shortcut icon. It's this green circle here with the tree of squares. You can type WinDirStat into the search field in your taskbar. It should come right up. Or if you don't feel like typing, you can click on the start menu icon, click all in the top right corner, and then in the list of apps, go down to W, and you should find WinDirStat there. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And once you're running WinDirStat, you'll get this window that pops up asking you what you want to scan. By default, it's going to scan everything, which means all the drives attached to your computer. I only have a C drive here, so that's all we're going to see in the list. If you did have multiple drives and you only wanted to select one, you can go ahead and click individual drives and then select the drive from the list. And then at the bottom, we can choose to scan just a single folder. So if you select individual folder, you can then type in the file path of that folder, or you can copy paste it in there, or you can click on this little icon in the far right here that's a folder with a magnifying glass. If you click on that, you can manually go through your directory tree and find the folder that you want to scan, then just hit OK. I do not want to do that. I want to scan everything. You'll notice there's also an option for scanning for duplicate files, but it will slow things down. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to choose all local drives, click OK, and then the Pac-Men go to work. Well, some of them are sleeping, but eventually they'll wake up. The scan will depend on how much space you're taking up and how many cores you're using. But once it's done, it'll look something like this. It looks like there's a lot here, but there really isn't. We'll take a brief look at the user interface and then take it apart piece by piece. So at the very top, we've got a pretty standard looking menu. Each item does not have a whole lot to it. It's really pretty bare bones. Below that, we've got a toolbar with a couple options for running your scans and cleaning things up. Below that, we've got the list of files and folders on your computer. To the right, we've got the list of extensions of files on your computer, as well as their color coding. And then below all that, we've got all the files on your computer shown by size and extension type. So that is very useful for seeing what's going on. You might also notice as I'm rolling over the squares, you'll have things changing at the very bottom, and that's down here. This is the status bar, which will give you the file path of the file that you're rolling over. And that's really about all there is to it. So let's go ahead and we'll start with the menu. Honestly, when I'm running WinDirStat, I don't do a whole lot with the menu or the toolbar. Usually it's just a matter of running a scan, deleting some files, and then scanning again. So I will pick out a couple items in the menus worth noting. Starting with File, select Target. It's just a way of running a new scan. Loading and saving results to CSV. If you do save your results to CSV, what that's going to do is create a spreadsheet of your scan, which you could then open in something like Excel. In the case of this scan, we have over 400,000 files, which would mean over 400,000 rows of information, so be ready for that. Also worth noting is Refresh All, which will rerun the scan. Refresh Selected, which will let you select a folder and then just scan that folder. And then Run Elevated, which will run WinDirStat as an administrator if you didn't do that right off the bat. That could be useful because, as you'll see later, if you don't run Elevated, you will have privilege folders that'll come up as unknown. And if you run as an administrator, you'll usually get access to those folders and be able to see what's in them. Going to the Edit item, you see there's just one command here, and that's Copy Path. So if you were to select a file or folder and then copy path, it'll copy the path to the clipboard, and then you could paste that in either to WinDirStat to run a more refined scan, or maybe paste it into Explorer to go directly to that folder. Although there is a better way to do that. Next is Cleanup. First item here is Open, so if you wanted to try to open a file directly from WinDirStat, you can do that. You can also select a file or folder in Explorer. So right now I've got the Windows folder selected. So if I select in Explorer, it just opens up Windows Explorer to the folder that's selected, which was the Windows folder. Going further down, you see we have options for opening a file or folder in a command prompt or a PowerShell. I'm not going to be doing any command line stuff today. We can also look at the properties of a file or folder. So if I click on that, this should look familiar. We also have some options for deleting and emptying files and folders, which I usually don't do through WinDirStat, but I suppose you could if you like. As you can see, there's also options for running the disk cleanup utility, disabling the Hibernate file if you have privileges, etc. After that, we've got the tree map. You can either choose to show or hide the tree map. So if I click on that, you see it goes away. We don't want to do that though. You can also select a folder and then zoom into that folder, and then it'll only show you the files of that folder. So from there you can zoom in and zoom out. You can also choose Select Parent or Reselect Child, which is another way of going in and out of your file directory. Next is Options, and most of these is just showing and hiding elements of the WinDirStat interface. If I click Show Free Space, you can see how much free space you have relative to the rest of your files. And if you click Show Unknown, like I was saying before, if you don't have access to folders, they'll come up as unknown. If you were to run WinDirStat as an administrator, you might get to see some of what is in that unknown space. Otherwise, we've got the rest of the elements of the interface, as well as the WinDirStat settings, which we'll look at in just a sec. Last up is the Help menu. If you click on Help and you have an internet connection, it will take you to the online wiki, which you can look at your leisure. And this is also where you go to see the About screen. You can see the who's and what's and thank yous and licenses that go along with WinDirStat. Okay, let's go back and have a look at the settings. I didn't even know WinDirStat had settings until I decided to make this video, but there are a couple of things worth looking at. So if we go to Options and then click on Settings at the bottom, that brings up this window, which also has a bunch of tabs, and we'll take a brief look at a couple of them. This first one, the Generals tab, is mostly aesthetics. So if I were to say uncheck the show sizes in gigabytes, megabytes, etc., then check the box for show stripes, hit apply, hit OK. You can see now that the folder listing is striped, which might make it easier to read. We also have the physical and logical sizes listed in, I believe, bytes, which, again, maybe that's easier for you to read. I don't know. I'm going to go back to Settings, undo the changes, apply, and we'll move on to the next tab, which I think is a little bit more useful, and that's the Filtering tab. So on the left side, we can choose which folders to exclude from our scan. So if you know there's folders that you're not going to touch anything in, or maybe you think leaving it out of the scan will help things be a little faster and make your tree map easier to read, you can go ahead and put those folders in here. And as I roll over the field here, you can see a couple of examples. The first one is C Windows Sys with a wildcard at the end. The wildcard is just the star symbol, and the wildcard represents a string of characters. So for example, if I were to use C Windows Sys with an asterisk, it would exclude both the system volume information folder and the system.save folder. So that's how that wildcard acts. We can also choose file patterns to exclude, and you see the examples they list here basically have the wildcard again and then extensions. So if you were to use the wildcard.sys and wildcard.exe, you would be leaving the system and executable files out of your scan. All the way at the bottom here, we have an option for excluding files less than a certain size. So on the left side, we can put in a number. We'll say 100. On the right side, we have a units drop down. We'll say megabytes. And so now anything less than 100 megabytes will be left out of the scan, and that can be useful for narrowing down your search to larger files. So if I hit apply, OK, then refresh the scan, you see we have a much simpler tree map, and again, it'll probably make it easier to narrow down the larger files or maybe even the more medium-sized files. Again, I'm going to set everything back, hit apply, and we'll move on to the next tab, which is the folder list tab. And this is literally just aesthetics. So on the left side, you can see we can get rid of the Pac-Man animation if you found that offensive for whatever reason. We could add and subtract columns from the folder listing. And on the right side, we have color coding for how deep you are in the directory path. So if I were to click on one of the colors, you can set it to something else. I'm not going to do that right now. The next tab is the same kind of thing except for the tree map. Again, it's just changing the aesthetics. So you can goof around with the sliders a bit. Adjust the lighting. Add the grid color. And again, it's just a matter of what's easier for you to read. Let's set everything back to defaults. And we'll look at the last two tabs real quickly. The first one is cleanups, and this is where you can assign command line commands to a cleanup shortcut, and that's just for helping you clean out your folders. I'm not going to get into command line stuff today, though. The last tab is just more options to help you exclude and scan a little bit differently. Again, I'm not going to get into those, but that is the settings in a nutshell. All right, next let's have a look at the toolbar. A lot of the functionality of the toolbar is also included in the menus that we just looked at. And you'll also see that most of the toolbar starts off grayed out, and buttons will become usable as we enter certain contexts. So I'm going to start from the left and go to the right. The first button is to select a new scan. So if I click on that guy here, we'll see a very familiar window that we've already talked about. So I'm going to go ahead and X out of it and go to the next one. And this is to rescan your drives. So if I click on this guy, we get a new scan. You'll notice next to the rescan button, we have a resume, pause, and stop button. I think they say different words as I roll over them, but that's effectively what they do. So if I were to run a rescan, now we can pause, resume, or stop our scan. The next button is to rescan a single folder or multiple selected folders. So if I select a folder here like this, now this button becomes usable, and it will rescan the selected folder and nothing else. So if you're working on deleting files and you only delete files from one folder, you can rescan that and get a new look at your tree map. Next is the filtering button. If I click on that guy, again, we get a familiar window that we've already talked about. Next up is to open the file or folder. So if we have a folder selected and I click it, it's going to open the folder in File Explorer. Otherwise, if it's a different kind of file, it will try to open it. If it's an executable, it will run it. After that, we have Copy Path to Clipboard, which is the same thing we saw under the Edit menu. Next to that is Open an Explorer window at that particular location. So again, if you have a folder and click on that, it does the same thing it did before. If you select a file, click on it, it's going to open the folder that that file is in. Next is open a command window at the selected item. So that's all that does. Again, I'm not going to talk about the command line in any depth. And after that, we have the Info button. So if we select a file, click on Info, we get a window that you should probably have seen before doing things in Windows. It gives you all the various information, permissions, etc. of a folder or file. Next to that, we've got two garbage cans. One is to send a file or folder to the recycling bin. That's the gray one here. The red one is to permanently delete something straight out. So be careful if you use either one of those. After that, we've got the zoom in and zoom out buttons here. So I'm going to go ahead and select a folder here. And if I click the magnifying glass with the plus sign, it zooms into just that folder. Click the minus magnifying glass to zoom out. If you go in extra deep into your file directory, you see it gives you several levels of zooming in and zooming out. And the last button is the question mark, which opens the online wiki as long as you have an internet connection. So that is the toolbar. Below the toolbar, we have the folder list. I think I referred to it as the file tree or directory tree earlier in the video, but it is officially known as the folder list. And in the folder list, we have our scanned drives, folders, and files on the left side, and then columns of relevant data on the right side. You'll recall that we can add and subtract columns for the folder list in the settings, but we're not going to do that today. If you wanted to see what was in a folder, you just click on the little plus sign next to the folder, and it will expand the folder. And if you wanted to collapse the folder, you just click on the minus sign. And you'll notice as we did that, it screwed up the size of our columns. If you wanted to resize your columns, all you do is roll over the column divider up in the heading line here. It should turn into a double-sided arrow. And when it does, you click and drag to resize your column. So moving on to the right, we have the subtree percentage shown as a graphic and as a number. What this shows is how much of its parent a folder or file takes up. So in other words, this window folder here takes up 58.8% of the used space on the C drive. Now let's say we were to go to the user folder here, expand that. We have a patron folder here that takes up 99.9% of the users folder, but this bar, even though it's bigger than the Windows bar, represents a lot less data. So again, these graphics and numbers represent how much of its parent the file or folder takes up. And that's part of the reason we've got color coding for these graphics. It's to help you know how deep you are within the file tree so you know where you're at. So moving on, we have the physical size and logical size of a folder or file. The physical size is how much space is actually taken up on the hard drive, whereas the logical size takes into account things like compression. Generally speaking, if you're looking at making space on your hard drive, you're looking at the physical size. After that, we've got the folders, which lists how many folders are contained within a folder. So in other words, there's 94,000 folders within the used space on the C drive. 84,000 of those are in the Windows folder. And then the last column we have listed here is last change, and that just tells you the last time a folder was changed. So if you were looking to clear up space on your hard drive, you can see something that might be ancient and not in use anymore. That would be a good cue as for something you might want to get rid of, or maybe move to another hard drive. So at the bottom of our folder list, you'll see we've got some tabs here. If you click on largest files, that will give you the list of your files by size, which can be extremely useful if you're just looking for the largest files to get rid of first. Usually that's the easiest and quickest way to make space on your hard drive. There's also a tab for duplicate files, but I didn't scan for duplicate files, so I'm going to get an error when I do that. Otherwise, we go ahead and click back on all files here. And one last thing I want to make note of is the column sorting. By default, we're sorting on percentage descending. If we wanted to sort by ascending, you just click on it again. You see the little arrow next to percentage, it goes up instead of down. Click it again, and it goes down. And you can do that for any of the columns. And that is the folder list. Next, I want to talk about the extension list, just real quick. The extension list is the window to the right of the folder list, so it's this guy right here. Before I do that, I'm going to stretch it out a bit, and I'm going to do that by rolling my cursor over the divider until it turns into a double-sided arrow, and then click and drag the divider over. So now we can actually see all of the columns for the extension list. And I honestly don't do too much with this window, but I'd still like to go over the columns real quick just so you know what's there. So we start off with the extension column over on the left side here. And if you didn't know, an extension is just a period followed by a couple of letters that help an operating system figure out what to do with a file. So we've got the extension itself and then the icon next to the extension, which might help you figure out what that file is for or what application opens it. To the right of that is its associated color in the tree map, followed by a brief description of what that extension is about, and some of these are more helpful than others. That's followed by how many bytes are taken up by files of that particular extension, followed by the percentage of space taken up by files of that particular extension, and then how many files actually use that extension. And that is all there is to the extension list. Alright, so that brings us to the bottom half of the window, which includes the tree map. That's this collage of colorful rectangles here. And the status bar just below it, which is most helpful for seeing the full path of the file represented by the rectangle you're currently rolling over. So each rectangle in the tree map represents a file. You can tell a bit about that file just by looking at the tree map. The size of the rectangle gives you an indication of its relative size compared to the other files in the scan. And the color will indicate the file type. And you figure that out by cross-referencing it with the extension list. So the whole idea of this tree map is it makes it easy to see which files are the biggest and what kind of files are taking up your hard drive space. So if you were to say have a folder of movies hidden somewhere, when you run the scan, that should show up pretty easily in the tree map, and then you can go straight to it and see if it's something you need to look at. If you are to select a file in the tree map, just like before, a bunch of options become available in the toolbar. You'll also notice that it highlights the file in the folder list, as well as its extension in the extension list. And this works both ways. So if I were to select a different file, you see it highlights that in the tree map and again pulls it up in the extension list. Incidentally, these green files here are all installer files, and it will usually take a pretty good chunk of your tree map depending on how many applications you have installed. And I generally don't recommend just uninstalling them willy-nilly. They are helpful for also uninstalling your applications and doing updates. So if you were to delete an installer, you might have trouble uninstalling or updating that application later. So you can figure out which application is associated with an installer file by looking at that file's properties, and then by looking at, like, say, the developer, you'll be able to figure out which application is associated with it. You can also try running the installer too, and that might give you a tip. So moving on, a little more helpful than just selecting a file from the folder list here is actually selecting a folder. And you'll see when I do that, it selects an entire rectangle worth of files. And I think it's kind of neat how folders are all grouped together like that. So if I were to select the System32 folder, you see that's this rectangle here, installer folder here, etc. You'll remember when we were looking at the toolbar earlier, with a folder selected, you can go ahead and click on the zoom in. And don't forget you can zoom out as well. And zooming in is going to be the only way to look at some of these folders, because as you can see, a lot of these files get impossible to see as you zoom out. So a couple more things that we can look at here. If you wanted to see your whole hard drive, granted you're not filtering things out, what you can do is go to Options and then show Unknown Space. Unknown Space are files and folders that you don't have permission to. So if you wanted to get a look at these, one thing you could do is run in elevated mode, which gives you admin privileges. So if I were to say go to File and then run elevated, we'll have better access to the files on the hard drive. So we'll let the Pac-Man do their thing, and when it comes up, if I go to Options, Show Unknown, you see we don't get that block back because we can now see the files in the folder because of our privileges. Incidentally, on this computer, I believe that whole unknown block is a recovery partition. So one more thing we could do is go to Options and Show Free Space. And now we can see the whole hard drive, including the unused space. And in this case, it's pretty clear that we're only using up about half the hard drive, so we're doing pretty well here. I'm going to uncheck these here. One last note, when you're looking at your tree map, there is a good chance you're going to see two very large files, and they are dependent on the size of your RAM. And those files are hybrifil.sys and pagefile.sys, which in this case, pagefile.sys isn't too big. Hybrifil.sys is your hibernation file. If you are in desperate need of space and you know you don't need hibernation mode, if you turn that off, that will kill this file outright. If you try to delete it without turning hibernation mode off, it's just going to come back. And pagefile.sys relates to your virtual memory, which again is tied to your RAM. I would not touch that unless you know what you're doing. But with that, I'm just about done here. I have used this application so many times in the past, both at work and at home, and I've shown it to so many people, and it's always proved extremely useful, so hopefully you do too. And with that, I thank you for watching and hope you have a good day.